Hello everyone and welcome to the Stardust Sanctuary, a place where we discuss the story and lore of one of the greatest franchises of all time, The Legend of Zelda. I'm Dust, and today marks the 35th year of the release of the first game of the franchise. This is also the first video uploaded on this channel, so I hope you enjoy. Time is one of the most common themes in the stories of the Zelda games. Just look at the titles of some of the games. A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time. Some of the games even have time travel. One of the things the Zelda franchise is known for is the timeline. Oh, the timeline. Many videos on YouTube are out there talking about it, debunking it, editing it, etc. But not a lot of them have thought of putting dates on it. Today I will be placing numerical years on the Zelda timeline. I'm not going to talk about any what-ifs in this video. I'm just going to discuss how many years apart each of the games take place. First of all, I'm just going to assume that the planet Hyrule is basically like Earth in terms of how the scientific matters go to make things simple. I will also be using a 12-month calendar. Keep in mind that the Zelda games seemingly never evolved from the medieval type of society. This makes it more difficult to pinpoint years, as all the games look similar. The only exception seems to be Breath of the Wild, with its Sheikah technology. In our real world, the Bronze Age was only about 5,000 years ago, so things like the 10,000 years before Breath of the Wild are just unimaginable for us. The origin point I will use is Ocarina of Time, since that is where the timelines branch out. So Ocarina of Time is 0 AOT, or after Ocarina of Time. In our Gregorian calendar in the real world, there is no 0 year, but for simplicity's sake, I will use a 0 year. You all know what happens here, so I don't have to explain that much. According to my research, A Link to the Past takes place at least 100 years after Ocarina of Time. But how many exactly? Let's go take a look at the Zora. The Zora look completely different from Ocarina of Time, and seemingly have no connection to the Hylian royal family anymore. These green Zora are what many people call River Zora, while the Zoras in Ocarina of Time are called the Sea Zora. According to some theorists like the Commonwealth Realm, the sealing wars after Ocarina of Time resulted in heavy pollution, which caused the Zora to evolve into the hostile River Zora. And because both types of Zora are in the Oracle games, this means the original Zora split in two instead of all changing together. So I'm going to put the date of A Link to the Past as the year 500 AOT. Next is Link's Awakening. I've not personally played Link's Awakening, so all my sources are secondhand. After Link defeats Ganon, he leaves Hyrule to go on a quest of enlightenment. So the first question becomes, how many years are in between the start and the end of A Link to the Past? My personal estimation would be that it was around 1 year, and at most 2 years if we want to highball. Let's also take into account sometime Link decided to chill in Hyrule before he left. This means Link's Awakening takes place in the year 502. As for the Oracle games, they probably take place the same year as Link's Awakening. A Link Between Worlds takes place 6 generations, or about 150 years after, because Sarashala said so. Many people speculate that Gramps and Kakariko is actually Link from the previous games, the hero of legend. This would place A Link Between Worlds in the year 652. As for Triforce Heroes, the developers say that it takes place a few years later, having the same Link as A Link Between Worlds. Considering he doesn't look that much older, I'd say this takes place at most 5 years later. So if A Link Between Worlds took place 652 to 653, Triforce Heroes takes place 656 AOT. Now we're on the original Legend of Zelda for NES. According to my research, it should take place thousands of years after Triforce Heroes. Hyrule Kingdom clearly expanded, even more so than in Breath of the Wild, and experienced the Golden Age thanks to the Triforce. Remember, our own known history in the real world has not yet even gone past 10,000 years, so it's hard to really grasp how long that actually is. As I mentioned earlier, the Zelda franchise doesn't seem to evolve past the medieval type of society. Could this be the result of Demise's curse? That's a topic for another day. Another thing is that there is no mention of the Master Sword in this game, so I will put Zelda NES in the year 6656 AOT. Zelda 2 takes place 4 years after, so 6660 AOT. In this timeline, Link goes back in Tattletales on Ganondorf. Majora's Mask is the direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, but how direct is it? First, we must know how much time it takes Link to get the 3 pendants to open the door of time to get the Master Sword. He does go back and forth from the past and future, but for simplicity's sake, I will say it's barely a couple of months. This would make Majora's Mask take place the same year, unless Ocarina of Time starts at the end of 0 AOT. Then that would make Majora's Mask 1 AOT. Twilight Princess. The developers have stated that this game takes place at least 100 years later. It's most likely way more than that. Assuming the hero's shade is the hero of time, and that the hero of time went and raised a family on a farm, the fact that no one remembers the hero of time means it's probably been way more than 100 years. Then again, he did retire on a farm, so things could have gotten forgotten real quick. Hyrule Castle Town looks like it barely changed at all in terms of style and technology. Again, a staple of the Zelda franchise. I would put Twilight Princess 400 years after Ocarina of Time, so the year 401. Four Swords Adventures. Many theorize that it takes place at least centuries after Twilight Princess. This is because there is no mention of the Master Sword, and everything that happened in Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess has been forgotten. So I'm placing Four Swords Adventures 6,000 years after Twilight Princess, making it set in the year 6402. Before I go any further, I want to remind you that Ocarina of Time starts the year 0, yet ends the year 7. This will affect the years in the adult timeline. In Wind Waker, the hero of time is still remembered and worshipped, and the royal family had the complete Triforce, but didn't know how to use it, suggesting there is a bit of a gap. First, we must know when the flood happened, and then when Wind Waker takes place. Actually, now that I remember the Great Flood happened, it basically means the hero of time just delayed Ganon, and didn't actually beat him, which is sad. Actually, even in the child timeline, Ganondorf returns, so basically, all the timelines, the hero of time either had a temporary win, or straight up just lost. Well, if you think about it, everything is temporary. Anyway, why did the Great Flood happen instead of another incarnation of Link be incarnated? That is a topic for another day. Let's assume that the Great Flood happened 400 years after the hero of time returns to the past. Now to estimate how much time was from the Great Flood to the beginning of Wind Waker. As most people seem to be very accustomed to living on small islands at that point in Wind Waker, I would say another 400 years have passed. This would make Wind Waker take place the year 800 AOT. Phantom Hourglass is the direct sequel of Wind Waker. If we assume Link's journey in Wind Waker took about 2 years from start to finish, Phantom Hourglass would be set in the year 809. Spirit Tracks takes place in New Hyrule, a land founded by Link and Tetra after Phantom Hourglass. One character, Nico, is still alive in this game, so a lot of time couldn't have passed. Then again, this is a fantasy game where people live hundreds of years, and trains are invented in such short amount of time. I'm going to estimate that it has not been 150 years, yet 100 years seems too little a time to establish an entire kingdom. So I'll just go with 125 years. This makes Spirit Tracks take place the year 934. Now putting dates before Ocarina of Time is kind of difficult, as we are going to go backwards. Four Swords and Ocarina of Time may be a few thousand years apart. Hyrule is in a different spot, and there was a war that just ended before Ocarina of Time began. In the time between these two games, the Gorons needed to have settled on Death Mountain and the Zora in Zora's domain. The Gerudo may have appeared as a species during this time, or maybe they were there sometime post Skyward Sword, but have been off-screen. I'm going to estimate that Four Swords takes place 1,000 years before Ocarina of Time. Based on my research, the Minish Cap to Four Swords is around 200 to 500 years apart, so let's say it's around 350 years. There was enough time for Hyrule to expand a bit more, and Vati to have another attack with a different hero. This would make the game 1,350 years before Ocarina of Time. In the Minish Cap, there is already an entire kingdom established, so this would easily take over a couple centuries after Skyward Sword. There has to have been enough time for the surface to be colonized and for the Skyloftians to be forgotten by everyone on the surface. Plus the eras of chaos and prosperity, the Interloper War, the War of the Bound Chest, the Picori festivals once a century, etc. According to my calculations, this would make it around 2,000 years to get from Skyward Sword to the Minish Cap, and this would make Skyward Sword take place 3,350 years before Ocarina of Time. So according to my research and the calculations I have made, the time from Skyward Sword to the Adventure of Link is around 10,000 years. Thanks for Wait, I think I'm forgetting something. Oh yeah, Breath of the Wild. Alright, let's do this quick. Since we don't know which timeline it officially takes place in, we can just assume that Breath of the Wild takes place way more than 10,000 years after the last game of whichever timeline you want to put it in. This takes into account the technological advancements of the Sheikah, which resulted in the creation of the Divine Beasts and the Sheikah Slate, which would take forever to develop when you look at the trends of the technology of the Zelda franchise. Nobody knows who Ganondorf is, except for maybe the Gerudo and the royal family. Basically, it's so far into the future that it's irrelevant. Then again, that can be said for a lot of the games in the timeline I showed. But Breath of the Wild is different. The span of my entire timeline is less than the gap between the last game and Breath of the Wild. That concludes my discussion on putting dates onto the Zelda timeline. Thanks so much for watching, as this is my first video on this channel. What do you think of the timeline? Let me know in the comments down below. If you would be so kind to give a like and even subscribe, that would be amazing. I'll see you all next time.